What's up, everybody? This is Anti-Hero with Player One Gaming, and today we're going to be doing a beginner's guide on character creation in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, this guide is geared towards beginners, people that either haven't played Baldur's Gate before or haven't played Dungeons and Dragons before. Now, if you have, doesn't mean there's not going to be things in this video that would be helpful to you, but the content will certainly be most helpful for those who are complete beginners. Quite honestly, there's a whole lot of information to keep track of. Character creation in Dungeons and Dragons is relatively complex. So if you are a beginner, it can be very confusing. So if you're new to this, hopefully this video will point you in the right direction. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to know is the distinction between origin characters and custom characters in Baldur's Gate 3. Origin characters allow you to play these pre-built characters that Larian has made. These are the characters that will be the companions in your game. However, you can play as one yourself, and if you decided to go this route, your class and your race will be decided for you. But the advantage is that your character will already have a full backstory, and you'll be able to kind of uncover that as you play. So that's kind of interesting. They also have this Dark Urge option, which allows you to be able to play this character who you can change the race and class of this, by the way. You don't have to play as a Dragonborn. But if you choose the Dark Urge, essentially what it is a custom character, but it gives a little extra storyline to it. Essentially, you are this character who wakes up, you have amnesia, you can't remember anything, but you find yourself having these dark urges, and you don't necessarily have to give into these urges. This doesn't have to be for an evil playthrough. It could be. You could give into the urge and be an evil character, or you could fight the urge and it could just be some added inner conflict. So that's pretty cool. But many of you, at least for your first playthrough, I would assume are starting completely from scratch with a custom character. Now, when you do this, the first decisions that you will really have to make are your race and your class. Now, for some reason in Dungeons and Dragons, they always put race first and then class. Same thing with the player's handbook. It's always like this. I don't really understand why, because it's my personal preference to choose my class first and then pick my race based on that class. I think it's a better way to do it. It's what I recommend. So in Baldur's Gate 3, we have 12 classes in the game, as well as 46 subclasses. However, I'm not going to be going over the subclasses today. In future videos, I will be doing detailed class build guides that will go over all of this stuff. And that's the time that I'm going to be really doing a deep dive and going over all the subclasses and things like that. For now, just a quick overview of all these classes. We've got the Barbarian. This is a martial class, strength-based. Typically a melee build. You're going to be a frontliner dealing a ton of damage. Fun class to play, a little bit of a one-trick pony. They run in raging to the front lines with their great axe or their great sword, and they take dudes out. It's about that simple for the Barbarian. Next up, we got the Bard. Bard is an artist, typically looked at as a musician, but technically a bard could be anything, a writer, an actor, poet, whatever. Bards find their magic through their art, and let me tell you, that magic is pretty powerful. The Bard is kind of a jack-of-all-trades class, good at a little bit of everything. Some people sleep on the Bard. I advise you not to do that. A Bard is actually one of the more powerful classes in the game, in my opinion, because they're such a jack-of-all-trades, and they're also just a really fun class to play. Next, we have Clerics. Clerics are essentially holy warriors. They are full spellcasters, but can also wear heavy armor and are a strong martial class as well. So they have quite a bit to offer. Most popularly, they're probably known as healers, but quite honestly, not every cleric needs to be a healer. You can build a pretty badass frontliner damage-dealing cleric if you wanted to. Druids are a nature-based class. They draw their magic from nature. They're also full spellcasters, and the biggest thing Druid has to offer is Wild Shape, which literally allows you to transform into an animal. Very powerful ability and very fun to play. Next up, we have Fighter. As you might guess, a martial-based class, frontliner, damage dealer. Some may say kind of a vanilla class, but I think they're pretty fun to play. Larian has given the Fighter some really cool abilities in this game, fighting styles and different battle maneuvers and things like that. So very straightforward class, but fun nonetheless. Next up, we have the Monk. This is the martial arts class, the Bruce Lee of Dungeons and Dragons. Monk is kind of poked fun at in the D&D community because the tabletop version of the Monk is pretty weak. The class has essentially become a meme. Don't get me wrong, while I've never played a Monk myself, I've heard that they're very fun to play, and I have no doubt. But in the current 5e rules, it's definitely a weaker class. The good news is that if you do want to play a Monk, not to worry, Larian has buffed them quite a bit from the 5e rule set. And while I have not given them a spin in BG3 yet, I certainly intend to. And I think they're actually a pretty powerful class now. You're going to specialize in unarmed strikes and all sorts of cool martial arts moves. All right, next up we have Paladin. Similar to clerics, they're kind of like this holy knight who's a mix of spellcaster and martial class. I would say that clerics are full spellcasters, paladins are actually half casters, which means that they won't get as many spells, but they're a much more powerful martial class. They get the Divine Smite ability, which is super strong, does a ton of damage, and is just very fun. It does not get old. Next we have the Ranger. Scouts and trackers, connected with nature, similar to the druid in that respect. However, again, when the druid is a full caster, the ranger is the half caster, and a little bit more martially focused to make up for it. In this case, a ranger is typically an archer, a ranged attacker. You could make a melee-based ranger if you wanted to. However, rangers are typically known to be the archer of the group. All right, rogues, the criminal of the group. Rogues are fast, stealthy, skillful. They typically are proficient in sleight of hand, which allows them to pick locks, disarm traps, and pick pockets. And their primary ability that you'll be utilizing is sneak attack, which allows you, in the right conditions, to deal out a ton of damage. Okay, last but not least, we have the three primary spellcasters in Dungeons & Dragons, the sorcerer, the warlock, and the wizard. So just a quick difference between what these groups offer, because they're all a little bit similar. Sorcerers are natural spellcasters. They draw from magic within themselves, and their big primary feature is metamagic. Metamagic allows you to manipulate magic, change it to your own benefit. Very cool ability. I will go into more detail on the sorcerer build video, but that's the thing that really sets the sorcerer apart from the other classes. The Warlock is a very unique spellcaster class. The Warlock gets their magic from a patron, a god or a devil, some divine being that they have pledged themselves to and get their powers from. The thing that makes a Warlock very unique is that while they only have 2 spell slots, they get those spell slots back on a short rest as opposed to a long rest, which is a huge benefit. And on top of that, those 2 spell slots will level up as you progress in level, which will have you upcasting certain spells that will do more damage and things like that. Those 2 things make the Warlock very unique to any other class in D&D, and that and Eldritch Blast is the 2 reasons that I really like playing a Warlock. Finally, we come to the Wizard. Wizards are masters of spellcasting, but not because they were born with it, not because they pledged their allegiance to a god, but simply because they're highly intelligent individuals who studied their ass off. Essentially, they know magic because they studied magic. They get their spell book that has all their spells in it. And the cool thing about the wizard is when you find a spell scroll in the game, you can actually copy that into your spell book, and now you permanently learn that spell in the game. Wizards also have other abilities like Arcane Recovery, which allows you to recover spell slots without having to take a long rest. There's no other spellcaster in the game that can learn as many spells as the Wizard can, which makes them a very powerful class. They can not only dish out a ton of damage with their spells, but they also have access to a lot of spells that give them good utility and support and make them kind of an all-around caster. So if you want to be that Swiss Army knife of spellcasters, you might want to look at the Wizard. So next we go over to race. BG3 has 11 races, as well as 31 sub-races. So before I go any further, I should note that in Baldur's Gate 3, every race gets a +2 bonus in one ability and a +1 bonus in another. So there are no racial ability score bonuses. Everyone has those. And the reason they did this is to make every race a little bit more viable than it is in 5e. So I guess if you really, really wanted to play that halfling barbarian, you could. But that said, there still are definitely races that are more optimal choices for certain classes. And I will be going into detail on those on the build guides that I do. But for now, just a brief overview of these races. First, we have Elf. The race features for the Elf are that they can move 30 feet per turn. They have proficiencies with longswords, short bows, and longbows. They have dark vision up to 40 feet. And they have this Fey Ancestry ability, which gives them advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. The sub-races for the Elf is the High Elf. And High Elf gets the Firebolt cantrip for free. And the Wood Elf. And the Wood Elf gets their movement speed increased by 5 feet. Next up, we have the Tiefling. Tieflings are essentially devil spawns. However, not all of them are evil. They could be good people that kind of have this curse about them, but because of their race, they certainly face, as it says here, constant suspicion in Faerun. Okay, so their race features are 30 feet per turn movement speed. They have dark vision up to 40 feet, and they have hellish resistance, which is resistance to fire damage. They only take half of the damage from fire damage. They have 3 subraces: the Asmodeus Tiefling, which gives you the Produce Flame cantrip. The Mephistopheles Tiefling, I think is how it's pronounced. They get the Mage Hand cantrip. And the Zariel Tiefling, which gives you the Thaumaturgy cantrip, which gives you advantage on intimidation and performance checks. Next up is the Drow, which is a subrace of the Elves, but Larian decided to put them as their own race because they're so unique to the other elves. They were essentially elves driven underground, turned evil. Many of them swore their allegiance to Loth, the spider goddess, a very evil race. However, there is a sect of Drow that separated themselves from the Loth-sworn Drow, the Saldarian. Those are essentially the good Drow elves that live on the surface. So the Drow get the Dancing Lights cantrip, has 30 feet movement speed, Drow weapon training in the rapier, short sword, and hand crossbow, superior dark vision up to 80 feet, and Fey ancestry just like the other elves. Next up we have humans. You know all about them, but they have a base speed of 30 feet per turn. They have weapon proficiency in spears, pikes, halberds, glaives, and armor proficiency in light armor and shields. And they have something called human versatility, which allows you to select an additional skill to be proficient in, and also increases your carrying capacity by 25%. The Githyanki race, they were a race born from Mind Flayer enslavement, and they now pledge to basically take out the Mind Flayers, and they do so riding atop red dragons. So very cool. They have different psionic abilities that they got from the Mind Flayers. So pretty cool, pretty unique race. They have Astral Knowledge, which gains proficiency in skills of a chosen ability. Mage Hand, they gain access to the Mage Hand cantrip. They have a base movement speed of 30 feet. And armor proficiency with light and medium armor, as well as proficiency in short sword, long sword, and great sword. There's the dwarf. Dwarfs, like all of the small races in BG3, have 25 feet per turn movement speed, so 5 feet less. They're proficient with battle axes, hand axes, light hammers, and war hammers. They have dark vision up to 40 feet. And Dwarven Resilience, which gives you advantage on saving throws against poison and has resistance to poison damage. There's 3 subraces for the dwarf: the Gold Dwarf, Dwarven Toughness, which increases your hit point maximum by 1 and continues to do so for every time you gain a level. Shield Dwarfs, they are proficient in light and medium armor. And the Dwergar, who can see up to 80 feet. They've got the superior dark vision. And they also have Dwergar Resilience, which gives them advantage on saving throws against illusions and being charmed or paralyzed. All right, next up, we've got the Half-Elf. Half-Elf, half-human. They have a 30 feet movement speed, weapon proficiencies with spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives, and armor proficiency with light armor and shields. They have dark vision to 40 feet, and just like their elven brethren, the Fey ancestry, which gives them saving throws against being charmed and can't be put to sleep by magic. So kind of a mix between the humans and the elves. Next are halflings. Halflings are like the hobbits of D&D. They can move up to 25 feet. They have a pretty cool ability called Lucky, which allows you to, when you roll a 1 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die, and you must use the new roll. They also have Brave. You have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. Halfling subraces include the Lightfoot Halfling. They have advantage on stealth checks. And then the Strong Heart Halfling, which has advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. All right, gnomes. Don't confuse them with halflings. That'll piss them off. But gnomes are, they're a little bit more wild and adventurous than halflings, a little bit more mischievous. But again, like halflings, they have the 25 feet per turn movement speed, and they also have Gnome Cunning. And Gnome Cunning gives you advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. The sub-races for the gnome, there are 3. There are rock gnomes. Rock gnomes get dark vision up to 40 feet, and also have Artificer's Lore, which adds twice your proficiency bonus to history checks. There are also Forest Gnomes. Forest Gnomes give you the Speak with Animals divination spell and dark vision up to 40 feet. And then there are Deep Gnomes, who have superior dark vision to 80 feet, as well as Stone Camouflage, which gives you advantage on stealth checks. All right, next up there's the Dragonborn, a race of humanoids who have dragon blood in them. Base movement speed is 30 feet, and they have a whole bunch of sub-races, essentially all of the different colors of dragons. And each one of these has a different ability. I'm not going to go over all of them in detail, but just know every Dragonborn has this dragon's breath, this breath that you spew out. In this case, the red dragon has fire breath, but a blue dragon has lightning breath. So depending on what subrace you pick, what color dragon, depends on what breath weapon you have. Same thing with the other subrace feature, which is the resistance to that same damage. So red dragon is resistant to fire damage, blue dragon is resistant to lightning damage, and so on. Finally, finishing things off for the races is the half-orc, half-human, half-orc. This is a pretty cool race that I think would lend itself very well to martial classes. You have a movement speed of 30 feet, dark vision up to 40 feet, a very powerful ability called Relentless Endurance, which allows you to, when you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of becoming downed. This is something that would lend itself to being a frontliner, like in a barbarian or a fighter class, and also has something called Savage Attacks, which says when you land a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, you deal an extra dice of weapon damage. Again, very strong ability that lends itself very well to being a frontliner, a martially focused character like a barbarian or a fighter. Okay, so for today, I'm going to pick the Wood Elf for my druid. Though I do think that the male Wood Elf just looks a little weird. So real quick, so I don't get... There we go. That's much better. There's something about the male Wood Elf that just kind of freaks me out. And once we've picked our race and our subrace and our class, we move on. Now, if you picked a spellcasting class like the Druid, or many of the others in BG3, you will be expected to pick your spells. So going over all the cantrips and spells is beyond the scope of this video, but you will pick your cantrips here. Then you will go right on to the backgrounds. Now your character's background is just that. It's essentially where they've come from, a little backstory for your character. There are 11 backgrounds to choose from. As you can see here, there's a small description of what the background is, but then right underneath that, it says 2 skills. So in Baldur's Gate 3, you have some skills that you can become proficient in, and your background is going to grant you 2 of those skill proficiencies. So when deciding on your background, make sure that it offers 2 skills that will fit your character well, and is something that is going to fit the playstyle that you're going for. And I should mention also that in addition to these 2 skills that you get, backgrounds also grant inspiration bonuses while you're playing through the game. So if you're a criminal and you pick a lock and break into a place, you may get awarded inspiration for doing that. So again, make sure you pick a background that is going to align with your play style, because if you choose criminal, but you're never going to be stealing anything or breaking in anywhere or anything like that, you may be really limiting yourself in how much inspiration that you can gain in the game. And by the way, inspiration is a mechanic that is going to allow you to re-roll the dice on certain ability checks. So every time you gain inspiration, you essentially gain 1 re-roll for any failed check that you do in the game. So it will behoove you to pick a background that really aligns with the character that you're going for. And next we move on to abilities. Now this is a very big part in character creation, very important to understand this. There are 6 different abilities that the character has: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. As you may see here, 3 of these abilities are physical attributes, and 3 of them have to do with your character's mental prowess. Now, strength affects your effectiveness with melee weapons, and it also determines how far you can jump and how much you can carry. Dexterity affects your effectiveness with ranged and finesse weapons, also affects your initiative and your armor class. Constitution, your stamina and physical endurance, it affects your hit point maximum. Your intelligence, this is your memory and mental power. It's also the spellcasting modifier for wizards. Your wisdom is senses and intuition. It's your spellcasting ability for clerics, druids, and rangers. And your charisma, which is your force of personality. Also your spellcasting ability for bards, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks. And charisma also influences trader prices. So it's what's going to allow you to get a discount from the merchants in the game. So every class in Baldur's Gate 3 has a primary ability score. And this will be noted by the star next to it. So here you can see Wisdom is the primary ability score for druids. And that is because of the fact that it is their spellcasting ability. So for your primary ability score, you're going to want to max this out as much as possible. You are going to assign your +2 bonus here, and you are going to bring it all the way up to a 17. Next, you're going to identify what is your secondary ability score, essentially your second most important score, and every class has one. For druids, it's going to be Constitution, and this is pretty typical of all spellcasters. All the spellcasters, their primary ability is going to be their spellcasting ability, and their secondary ability is going to be their Constitution. A lot of spellcasters don't even wear armor, so the Constitution is going to allow you to jack those hit points up as much as possible to make sure that you are at least a little bit protected from incoming damage. So with the Constitution, you're going to want to take the +1 modifier in that and jack this up as much as possible, which is going to be a 16. So here you can see that I can only get it up to 14, which means I need to take away some points somewhere else. So I'm actually going to take away I could go strength or charisma, but we're going to decide to bring the charisma down to 10 in this case, which will allow us to put another point into Constitution. But as you can see, as we get higher, the points cost more. So I'm going to take down Dexterity a little bit more as well, bring that down to 12, and that's going to allow me to get up to 16 with Constitution. And I have 1 point left over, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw that into Strength. Ideally, you're going to want to try and get even numbers here. And the reason is this. These numbers here that you see really don't come into play. What comes into play while you're playing the game is the modifier that is associated with these numbers. So I know that's a little confusing if you're new to this, but it works like this. Your modifier is added to your rolls. So you will roll a 1d20 and then you will add that modifier. The modifier is either a negative or a positive number that goes all the way up to +5. At 8, your modifier is -1, as you can see right here. Once you get to 10, that makes it a even modifier. It's neutral. If you're at a 10, you're essentially of average ability. So if I have a 10 in intelligence, that means I have average intelligence, which gives me a 0 modifier. And it continues to go up every 2 numbers. So at 12, I get +1. At 14, it's +2. At 16, +3. At 18, it goes up to +4. And at 20, we've maxed out at a +5 modifier. And that's why you're trying to get even numbers here. Because at 11, my strength modifier is still +0, same as it is when it's at 10. However, if I bring it up to 12, that's what brings my modifier up. So as often as possible, you want to get these scores at even numbers, although it's not always going to be possible. One exception is Constitution. Even or odd number regardless, the more points you have in Constitution, the more hit points your character will have. But just to reiterate, the most important thing here is that your primary stat is maxed out at 17, and your secondary, in my opinion, should be maxed out at 16. Everything else is really up to you and the kind of character that you want to build. Okay, so then we come to the skill proficiencies. We have a list of the different skills in the game. I'm not going to go over all of these. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory in what they do. Now, unlike in the tabletop game where you can pick literally any skill that you want, BG3 does limit the skills that you can pick based on your class and your race, which honestly is fine. They're just giving you the default skills that are appropriate for your class. For instance, nature. It's probably much more important as a druid to be proficient in nature as opposed to something like persuasion, which is a charisma-based skill. And that's another thing that I should mention. All of these skills are attached to the ability scores. So athletics is a strength skill, acrobatics is a dexterity skill, and so on. So you're going to go ahead and pick your proficiencies in your skills. The proficiency gives you a +2 bonus in that skill. So as you can see, when I take it out of insight, it drops me down to a +3. But if I decide to go with insight, it gives me that +2 bonus, making it a +5. So after you go through the abilities, it will allow you to prepare spells just as you did with the cantrips. So you go ahead and pick your spells to start off with. And at that point, you're good to go. You can, of course, go into edit appearance here, and there are a whole host of different things that you can do to change the way you look. All different kinds of skin colors and different options they have available here. They have a maturity slider. You can be old or young, freckles or no freckles, a whole bunch of different options. Scars, no scar. They even let you pick your genitals. Have fun, everyone. But yeah, you can put tattoos, makeup, all different hairstyles, hair colors, a host of all different kinds of options. And that will about wrap it up for the beginner's character creation video. I hope that was helpful for all of you starting the game for the first time. If it was helpful, I do just ask that you like the video and hit the subscribe button below. It's going to help me to continue to grow this channel and come out with more and more content for you guys. So thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.